One day, Ordney made a disturbing announcement. The cabbage crop, he said, was going to be smaller than expected. Worms had got into it. They'd have only about 2/3 of the cabbage they'd had last year. After this, not only was the food at lunchtime plainer, but there was less of it. One week they had string beans, last year's pickled cabbage, and goat's milk pudding for lunch 4 days in a row. And when they opened their baskets at dinner time, they found only a bottle of cold potato soup to serve as both dinner and breakfast. Clary had started a garden just a few days after the Emberites arrived at the Pioneer Hotel. She had cleared a patch of ground about 40 feet square, not far from the riverbank, and planted seeds that she had brought from Ember. Children who were too little to go to work in the village helped her pull weeds and fetch buckets of water from the river. Old people sat in the shade giving her advice. After a while, green shoots appeared in rows on the patch of dirt, and Clary was out there every morning and every evening, tending them. In several weeks, there would be a little extra food for the people of Ember out in their own front yard. But it wouldn't be nearly enough. Some people were already grumbling about their skimpy dinner parcels. One night, when Doone was in room 215 eating with his father and the others, he heard voices in the hall and went out to see a cluster of people a few doors down. Lizzie was there. Doone spotted the red cloud of her hair. Tick was there too. His voice carried above the rest. "Well, I got 3 carrots, a plum, and a chunk of sour cheese," he said. "Lucky me. That ought to keep me going for a while." A few people laughed dryly at this. Doone heard Lizzie giggle. "It'll keep you going for maybe half an hour," someone said. "I don't know how they think we can work with nothing but scraps to eat." Along the hall, other doors opened, and other voices joined in. "All I got was some limp green beans and a few clumps of porridge." "I've had carrot soup 3 days in a row." Some people counseled patience. "We shouldn't complain," someone said. "It's hard for them to give us food. We should be grateful for—" "I'm tired of being grateful," someone else broke in. "They promised to feed us, but they're starving us instead." "It seems to me," said Tick, "that we should do something about this. I think maybe I'll mention the problem at lunch tomorrow. Maybe we all should. Maybe we should tell them it's very hard work when you're hungry." "I'll tell them," cried Lizzie's high voice, and other voices rose in agreement. An excited, angry babble filled the hallways, drowning out those who spoke for patience. "I'll speak up. We have to protest. Tick is so right." "Tick for mayor!" someone shouted, laughing. For a second, Tick looked surprised. Then his eyes glowed with pleasure. He raised a fist in the air. "We'll stand up for ourselves," he said, and the people around him roared and raised their fists too. Doone turned to his father and Edward and Sadge, who all had come to the door to see what was going on. "We should tell the patrons," he said. "If we're working, we need enough to eat. It's only fair." "Of course, they don't have to give us anything," said Doone's father. "They're giving what they think they can spare." He looked sadly at the dry chunk of cornbread in his hand. "But I suppose it can't hurt to mention it," he said. "Without being rude, of course. I imagine they're doing the best they can." Mrs. Polster agreed to be the one to bring the matter up. She did so at lunch the next day. They were having cold spinach soup. "I have a request," she said firmly. She sat down her soup spoon. Everyone looked to her. Doone felt a jitter in his stomach. "We have noticed," said Mrs. Polster, "that the food parcels you so generously give us have become considerably smaller lately. We find that when we have eaten what is within, we are still, to be frank, hungry. This is a difficulty for us." There was silence. Everyone stared at Mrs. Polster, who sat very calmly with her hands in her lap, waiting for an answer. "What?" said Martha Parton. At last, "Did I hear right?" "I believe so," said Mrs. Polster, "unless you have ear trouble." "I said we are not getting quite enough to eat." Martha laughed. "Ha!" A one-note laugh, a laugh of disbelief. Kenny stopped chewing and looked frightened. Ordney drew himself up and cleared his throat. "I am surprised," he said. "I thought that you people understood the situation." "We do indeed," said Doone's father hastily. "We're very grateful for what you've done for us. It's just that We're working quite hard, said Clary. And it's a very small amount, said Miss Thorne timidly. For both dinner and for breakfast, added Edward Pocket. Last night, said Doone, I had a boiled egg and 3 carrots for dinner, and nothing for breakfast this morning. There was silence again, a terrible, vibrating silence. Then Ordney leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table with his fingertips. Now listen here, he said. We're doing the best we can with what has been asked of us, and I must say a great deal has been asked. Suddenly, we're supposed to feed twice as many people as before, more than twice as many. He glared at the Emberite, shifting his eyes to each one in turn, and yet we do not have twice as much food as we did before. It's true that each family is being given a little extra from the storehouse for this emergency, but not much. Sparks Village just does not have enough for 400 extra people. Are we supposed to feed you instead of our own families? Why should we? Who are you, anyway? You strangers from some city no one's ever heard of? By the end of his speech, Ordney's face was a deep red, and his voice was shaking with rage. Doone felt frozen. All he could think was, he's right, of course he's right. But we're right, too. Everyone else must have been thinking the same thing. They finished their soup in silence. At the end of the meal, Martha dumped the food parcels on the table instead of handing them out. They each took one. But Doone's father was the only person who said thank you. Later, when Doone opened his parcel, he found a wedge of cabbage leaves turning yellow at the edges and a hunk of some sort of bean cake. His stomach clenched. They're tired of helping us, he thought. What are we going to do?